That's a new thing that Zoom's added. This meeting is
Yeah.
I haven't really looked into it to figure out if we can make her silent.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't looked into that either, but yeah, I've noticed that they've started doing it recently. New thing. I guess it's good. No secret recording.
So welcome everybody. This is a little bit of a new time for us, 1 o'clock Central, and I'm so happy that so many of you registered. And if I know a lot of people are still working from home, some people have gone back into the office, but I'm just curious, and throw it in the chat if you want to let me know if this is a good time for you going forward. Do you like this midday time? I've been doing a lot of sessions on Saturday as well. We've had some pretty good turnout for Saturdays, but I'm really curious to know your thoughts. If I'm dropping the time, how it serves you. All right, Rebecca, thank you. And you, Rebecca, it looks like you're still at home, working from home. Yep. Welcome, George. It's good to see you. And Ken. Hi, Ken.
Hello. It's great to be here.
Yes, great to see
you.
Yeah,
good to see some familiar faces and names for those faces I can't see. And some new ones.
We have our super young AIESECer Leah on the call.
Hi, Leah.
Hi. Welcome. So I think we're a couple minutes past the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. And as people join, I'll be sure to invite them in. So I'm just going to share my screen. So hello, everybody. Welcome. As you know, my name is Maggie Gissel. I'm the Executive Director for AIESEC Life, which is the Alumni Association for AIESEC in the United States. It's a pleasure to have all of you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. So diversity, equity, inclusion, simply reinforcing strong DEI programs helps every employee to show up each day without fear of being their true selves. This fosters a higher degree of engagement, productivity, and innovation that contributes to a company's increased sustainability and its bottom line. But not to mention, it's very important and it's the right thing to do. We are really fortunate to have some DEI experts in our alumni community. The Acacia Company was founded by 3 women, 2 of whom are AIESEC alums. We have Natalie. Natalie brings 7+ years of project management and team development experience to her group. She has supported a variety of small and medium-sized companies, as well as nonprofit organizations with strategic planning, learning and development, and team management. Natalie is from AIESEC Austin, where she currently serves on their board of advisors. And lucky for me, she is also the hub chair for Austin. And I've been working with Natalie for quite a few years now. And it's been a really, really big joy to partner with her and collaborate with her on so many different AIESEC Life events. Also with us is Thu-Hong. She is a human resources professional with a background in the corporate tech and international nonprofit sectors. Her experience is general HR operations, recruitment, learning and development, project management, and DEI strategy. In her most recent role with Google, she oversaw services and programs to help make HR easy and intuitive for employees. Thu-Hong hails from Appalachian State, AIESEC Appalachian State, unfortunately not an LC that's currently with us, but we are so happy to have Thu-Hong with us today. So I just want to have a few housekeeping notes, if I may. If we can ask everybody to mute themselves and go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and Natalie and Thu-Hong will be happy to answer them. I'm going to help sort of moderate that. We are recording this session and we'll make it available to you in the next few days. So now I would like to welcome Natalie and Thu-Hong and hand it over to wonderful women from the company.
Hello, everybody. It's great to see you all today. Lots lots of good turnout today, lots of familiar faces, lots of new ones. So it's great to see everybody. We're so happy that we got the opportunity to speak to you guys today. So thank you, Maggie, for giving this opportunity to us, and thank you all for being here today. And we're excited that you guys are interested in learning more about this topic. We clearly are very excited and passionate about it. So we're glad to talk about it today. And today, talking specifically about DEI for business. So Maggie introduced us a little bit, but so Thu-Hong and I, we started our company along with our partner Tari, and it's focused on working with organizations, both nonprofits and business. And when I say business, in the title of this session, I do mean organizations, but when we think about the business operations side of a nonprofit, so think about it in that context. So if you have not met me before, my name is Natalie. My pronouns are she, her. And we've also got Thu-Hong here as well today, and her pronouns are also she, her. So we're going to jump in here. I'm going to show you a little bit about what you'll learn today. We got some objectives for you. So today we're going to focus on these here. I'll let you read them. You can kind of figure it out, but we're going to kind of go through, what should really be considered when thinking about how to actually start making impact in your organization for DEI, in doesn't matter which organization you're in, but there are some common pitfalls that we do see organizations encounter. So we'll touch on those and give you a few tips, and we'll also have some space for Q&A. So on that note, I want to kind of talk about some rules of engagement that we've got for you all that really help us make sure these spaces are really productive, supportive, and good, safe spaces for everybody. So please, stay engaged, close all other distractions. It's something that we certainly encourage. It's really great when you're present. What's the AIESEC value? Enjoying participation. Really embracing that today is great. So, we love to see your faces if you're willing to show your video. It's this is a conversation, and we want to be in this space with you all and share it with you. Feel free to type in the chat. We love seeing stuff in the chat. Use it, type in +1s and snaps and all that good stuff. Put any questions that you have there. We also have an anonymous Q&A too, if you prefer to submit your questions via anonymously, because we do understand that, in these kinds of topics sometimes can be sensitive for some people, or you don't want any kind of identifying information out there with regards to your question, but you want it answered. So feel free to submit your questions that way as well, or in the chat, whichever you prefer. It's up to you. Be mindful of how you participate. Understand that your impact of your actions. If you're somebody, for example, who talks a lot in sessions, maybe consider listening. If you're somebody who listens, maybe consider speaking up and asking questions. Just be mindful of how you're engaging in this space with us today. What's said stays here, what learned leaves. So we are trying to have a safe space. That being said, this is recorded, so just so you know that, make sure everybody's aware that it is recorded, and it will be on the AIESEC Life platform, which you also, it's a good thing for you to be able to access this stuff and reference it later. So you'll get the slides, so you can take lots of notes, but you'll also have the slides for reference and recording later as well. And really, we encourage you to use discomfort as a catalyst for learning. These thoughts or these concepts, some of them may be really familiar, some of them may be a little bit different. So just keep an open mind and embrace that discomfort and use it as a learning tool for you. So now that I've got that, I want to know a little bit more about who's in the room. So if you'll type in the chat, what is your home LC? What was the last role that you had in AIESEC? And what is your current job function and industry? Who do we got? Who do we got here today?
Yeah, see some familiar faces. So I'm really hoping to see some LCs represented that I know are in this room.
Current member. I love seeing some current members here. Good. Yes. Mike Jalkio is LCP with me. That's great. Good, good. We got some internationals here today. That's great. Very cool. So one thing that I want to say on this as well is, and it's something we learn more and more about every day in our work is, and it's something most of us probably as ISECers are familiar with, but I think is worth noting is that no matter which country we come from, there's a little bit of a different context, especially around this specific work. Every country's got a little bit of a different history. So they've got a little bit of different background and understanding. Sometimes the language that gets used in discussing this kind of work is different. So just keep that in mind as we go into this space. And I will say that most of our examples are in reference to a more US focused reality. So keep that in mind, take everything with a grain of salt. If you're from another country, or if you're thinking about this for another country, make sure that you're also being mindful of what's really the current context for that country around this work as well. Great, great. Yes, keep them coming. Thanks for joining, everybody. Great to see such a diverse group of people. And also I want you to keep in mind too that there's a lot of different levels of roles here, a lot of different industries here. So take what you can and apply it back to your specific role. There's something in here for every level and every industry. And we work with all industries. We kind of are industry agnostic, as they say. So this work, this work applies across the board. So now I want to kind of jump in and kind of make sure we're grounding ourselves in a little bit of the current state of DEI in workplaces and in organizations. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Thu-Hong to kick us off with some current state.
Yes. Thank you, Natalie. And as Natalie mentioned, a lot of the material you'll see here is specific either to the US, but we wanted to show these statistics to really ground ourselves in the current landscape of how DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion applies to the workplace. So just take a second to kind of take all of these in. I know there's a lot here. And so typically you hear about diversity, equity, and inclusion in relation to social activism and increasing awareness and having, events and it more connected to civil rights and human rights, and not necessarily maybe bringing it back to the place where we spend a lot of our daily lives, which is the workplace. And as you can see from these statistics, DEI is certainly connected to many parts of a business or an organization. These challenges can be, some of which that you can see here, can be faced by groups in the workplace and can compound and multiply based on the different parts of someone's identity. And so now that we know that DEI and DEI strategy can impact the workplace and the work that we do, I want to make sure that we align on what the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion mean and really start from the same place in a shared language. So the first term to go over is diversity. And as Natalie mentioned earlier, we understand that there are a lot of different nuances, interpretations across cultures and life experiences. And so you may have heard about DEI as a buzzword, and it can be interpreted differently in other places. For example, in Germany, where I am, it is used differently. But we want to make sure that we start with the same definition here. And what diversity is refers to the differences and variations found in a group. That can encompass gender identity, race, ethnicity, age, class, ability, different values and experiences. And it's really important to understand that this is within a group, right? And it's important to know that diversity as a term is not a proxy for race, ability, sexual orientation, or any of the other characteristics that we mentioned when describing an individual person. This is where it's really important to be precise in our language so we don't further marginalize an individual or group. For example, if we're referring to somebody, to an Asian coworker, we wouldn't want to describe them as a diverse coworker, or somebody who's a woman and say we need a diverse person in the room, when we really mean maybe racial diversity or gender diversity. So just being aware of how this term is used to describe a group, to refer to a group and not a single individual. The next term is equity, and this can be a harder concept to understand because it's often substituted and synonymous with equality, which is different. And there's a common belief that in order to promote fairness, we must prioritize equality. Equality means that we provide everyone with the same thing. Equity, on the other hand, recognizes that not everybody starts at the same place, and it's important to allocate the exact resources, access, and opportunities needed to reach an equally positive outcome and success for all people, regardless of their existing social or cultural factors. So equity is not the same as equality. And this concept of fairness is really only relevant if everybody starts from the same place. Equity, however, can be sometimes perceived as unfair because it levels the playing field and allocates resources based on need. And we'll go over an example of this in the next image here. All right, so take this photo for example. At the top, you can see equality visualized, where everyone and each person is given the same bicycle. In this case, if our target outcome is for each person to comfortably ride a bicycle, you can see that only one person is able to do that, and another person isn't even able to use that bike at all. Equity, on the other hand, focuses on outcomes and equal outcomes versus equal input, or giving the same resources. Again, if our goal here is for everyone to comfortably ride a bike, we have to acknowledge that some folks start at different places and some folks have different needs. In the bottom half of the photo, you can see everyone is given a bicycle based on their need, and everyone can ride comfortably, and outcomes are now equitable. So, on to the next term, the last term here is inclusion. And please type questions or use Slido, the anonymous questions, if you have any along the way. So for this last term, what we want to talk about is inclusion. And that essentially means incorporating the perspectives, contributions, needs, and viewpoints of all people. You may have heard people talk about inclusion, the differences between diversity and inclusion, and comparing it as diversity is being invited to a party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And we think that this is actually not exactly right, and it can be a little bit limiting. True inclusion is not just being asked to dance or participate in the party that you were invited to. The way we see it is it also means being part of the creation of something, of an initiative, or in this analogy, a party or a dance. And it's important that inclusion involves co-creation by every member of the group, not merely an invitation from someone who, for people who have been historically underrepresented to be present within an existing space. That's an important nuance to understand here when it comes to inclusion and what it means to really build inclusively from the beginning, from the design of something. So a lot of DEI work focuses on bringing various communities and perspectives and backgrounds together, but it doesn't always provide these same people or these communities the space to co-create and make sure the space fits their needs. So that's going to be key to this work.
Thu-Hong, we've got a great question from Maggie about, is inclusion, in quote unquote, a seat at the table?
Oh, thanks, Maggie. Yes, I think that's a great way. I've also heard inclusion being talked about that. We want to take it a step further, and it's not just an invitation, right? But deciding, what what part of this event conversation, what part of this table, why are we gathering? What can we do to make this more fitting to everyone's needs, and not just having the same event around a table and inviting someone to participate in something that's already existing and designed, maybe with or maybe without them. And so that's just that extra step further that we see is really what inclusion means.
Sitting at the
great
table
question.
and making the agenda for the meeting.
Yes. All right. And so I want to also talk about what gets in the way of integrating diversity, equity, inclusion. And what many of us think about when we think about DEI work or discrimination or oppression is really on the interpersonal level. And so what we want to really talk about here, and what we will continue to talk about, is that oppression and discrimination, when it exists within an organization or an institution, it may not be so obvious. It often is below the surface. And we tend to personalize the argument of oppression, believing that if we treat people in a nice way or we treat people equally, then discrimination doesn't exist. So that's like saying sexism is over because men or a man is respectful or is nice. And that's just not true, and can sometimes ignore the underlying structural ways oppression shows up. So as you can see in this graphic here, there are 3 other levels of oppression that exist: internalized, institutional, and structural. And if we want to tackle systemic oppression, if we want to create long-lasting structural changes, we have to look below the surface at our processes and our systems. And oftentimes the business processes, the operational things that you conduct every day, in areas that may have adverse impact on marginalized communities, these things happen often unintentionally. So I think it's really important as we move on to really understand what do we really mean with oppression as a first step to understanding how to remove it and put more inclusive practices in their place. So I'd like everyone to just take a few seconds to read this definition of oppression. As I mentioned, at the root of all barriers to diversity, equity, inclusion is oppression, and this operates as a system. It can be both subtle and blatant. So when we're talking about racism, sexism, ableism, classism, other forms of isms or other forms of oppression, it can be difficult to see that these issues are part of an interlocking system that operate at all levels: the personal, interpersonal, institutional, and structural level. So as I mentioned before, much of this stems from the fact that we think of oppression as interpersonal only because those are some of the more obvious examples that we see, like if someone tells a joke or says a slur. But what we're exploring today is what it means to advance DEI in your business and what that looks like when oppression leaves the workplace. So I want to show some examples of what's on the other side when we invest in diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace. And remember that DEI has outcomes and business outcomes that we can point to. So this first statistic, 35%. Companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry medians. Sorry, my clicker here. Companies with more diverse teams have a 22% lower turnover rate than those with homogeneous teams. Companies with skilled, inclusive leaders are 45% more likely to see an increase in market share and 70% more likely to capture a new market. Companies that fall into the top 25% in terms of gender diversity are more likely to generate above average earnings, and that number soars to 30% for ethnic diversity. And if you'd like to see these articles, we can link them and send them to you as well. Just let us know. But overall, the message we want to give you here is that diversity is good for business, yes, but it's also just in general good overall. And we want to make sure that as you're going forward and advocating for DEI in your workplace, we know that it can be a little dehumanizing to have to justify it in terms of business means, but we still want to provide you with these statistics, with these facts to equip you to be able to make a change within your organization and communicate with your organization's leaders in the way that they'll understand it first, and just to open that door. And so as you begin on your DEI journey, your allyship journey, there are some common mishaps that can occur, and usually it comes with the best intentions. But at the end of the day, it's really important. We want to make sure that that everyone here understands that intentions is not the same as impact and does not determine impact. We can be the most well-intentioned person and care a lot, and trust me, I know AIESECers, they care a lot. We care a lot, and we always want to do the right thing, and that desire to always do the right thing and want to do well can get in the way and can make it even harder to recognize and acknowledge when our actions aren't aligning with what we intended. And so I want to talk through some 3 common pitfalls that we've seen in organizations, and talk through some alternatives and things that you can consider for your organization. So the first common pitfall is, and sorry, I just saw a quick question here. Is there any other questions? Okay, perfect. I do want to just pause here actually before we go into these common pitfalls. Does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to make sure they clarify about the definitions? Okay, cool. Then we'll move on here. So the first common pitfall is rushing into diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. We've seen it a lot that companies really want to be helpful. They want to jump in, and sometimes these actions can be more about appearing to be helpful than actually being helpful. And in more harmful ways, we can unintentionally tokenize other people by plugging people into conversations or work just because how they identify, expecting them to represent their whole community, and really focusing on the things that they can do for the company, but without building that authentic relationship or understanding the unique needs of that person. And so we've seen that sometimes, especially with the best meaning intentions, and what we propose for that is really to make sure that you're building authentic relationships and you're gathering input from your staff and learning from experts. It can be a tricky situation going to, for example, maybe your company only has a few women, for example, going to the only woman and saying, what can we do? Can you lead this project? And maybe they don't even want to lead that project, or they're not interested in it. So make sure you gather input, really make sure that you're taking the time to learn yourself, and when needed, bring in experts and people whose job and time are willing to dedicate towards this work. The next common pitfall we see is starting with a diversity hiring project. We often hear companies say they just need more quote unquote diverse people, right? So whatever that means. And we know that happens. I mean, it's just natural. It's the first most visible thing, the most obvious thing when you see a problem. Yes? Oh, do we have a question? Oh, sorry. Yes, if you have a question, please feel free to unmute. But yes, to continue, when we see a problem, we immediately think, well, we just need more representation here. And so for that, we say, first off, really scrutinize what does diversity mean, and making sure that you're not using it as a proxy to mean something else. So if you really are looking to hire more people of color, then prioritizing, yes, racial diversity and racial representation is something you're looking for, or gender diversity. And another thing we often hear around diversity hiring projects is that people and company leaders who say that they know that there is diverse talent out there, but they are unsure if people are the right fit or going to be qualified, and they don't want to lower the hiring standards in place to have more diversity. And so to that we say, people of color are everywhere. 1 in 4 Americans have a disability. 25% of Americans don't identify as heterosexual. Women as a group are highly educated, and in fact, Black women as a demographic are the most educated of any group. And so there is talented people in all corners, in all industries, and really focusing on when we're starting, and if you're interested in starting a diversity hiring project, to make sure that you're looking and analyzing the talent pool around you, and perhaps not making an assessment of that talent pool based off of your personal experience and personal exposure. But more importantly, ensuring that you have inclusive and equitable systems. It can be irresponsible to bring in talent that isn't set up for success when they're brought into your company. So making sure that you are taking the time to think through, what does that really mean for my company, and focusing on what we can do to build more inclusive and equitable systems before starting a hiring push. And the next and last mistake here is expecting lasting change with any single one act. So some common single acts that we've seen is unconscious bias training, or even a letter out to the company, or hiring maybe one person. And all of those things, we're not saying that those things aren't positive. They're certainly useful and certainly needed. But what we want to point out is that this needs to happen within a wider strategy for integration across all functions of your business. So making sure that you're examining a multitude of areas across your business, uncovering places where there may be adverse impact. And if you want to be successful, diversity and inclusion initiatives can't exist on their own. They really need to be part of a comprehensive strategy and plan with goals, with outcomes. But yes, to talk more about this, we'll talk more about this later too.
We've got a great question actually, Thu-Hong, before we skip to this, from Rebecca, that asks, and this question is super topical, especially for AIESECers and a lot of us who work with multicultural organizations or internationally. And so she asked, how do you integrate foreign nationals into the DEI conversation within a company? And it seems that some companies have a more narrow view of DEI, especially in the tech industry. And what suggestions do we have on how to get a company to incorporate cross-cultural training?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for this question. And I can relate to it also from a tech background too. I think it's really important to understand and do a little bit of homework and research here about what existing knowledge people have about diversity, equity, inclusion, and how it relates to their country. What we've seen working with other countries is that there are absolute differences in the prioritization of the conversation. So in the US, and it makes sense because of our history and the social constructs we've built around race is a top conversation. But in other parts of the world, it's more about nationality or gender. And so I think understanding where is that foot in the door, that first place you can start to relate to folks, is a great way to bring in, or like you said, integrate other people into what DEI means in the US and how we understand it in the US. Natalie, do you have any other thoughts here? Or hopefully, Rebecca, if you have any follow-up questions, I answered your question.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add to that is, is to really, if you're thinking about how do I try to, advocate for some kind of initiative in my company for this kind of topic specifically. I mean, if we're looking at, how do we integrate our teams and work more, collaboratively together, and this is where understanding really comes from. And so, if we're talking about inclusion, then this is absolutely an important conversation to have. If we're trying to really account for everyone in our company, then it's important that we understand the cultural context or the historical context that may come with, different upbringings, different experiences, and that's cross-culturally in terms of country and nations, but it's also in terms of just lived experiences that may be different. And so that's where understanding and having these kinds of spaces is going to, ultimately create deeper empathy, deeper understanding, and allow teams to be able to work better together, more efficiently together, without as many potential for, assumptions or mishaps or mistakes or, things like that.
Right. Yeah, great question, Rebecca. Thank you. Yeah, so would love to pause here, and if everyone could type in the chat, what's one word of how you're feeling in this moment? I just, spoke for a very long time, and so would love to hear kind of what's resonating, what's coming up for you. And so, yes, please type in the chat. And if one or two people would like to come off mute and just share how these topics are resonating with you, these definitions, is any of this information new? Or are you thinking about things that may have happened to you in the workplace or that you've seen? Yeah, I would love to hear. Some great words here: hopeful, informed, safe.
So if I may, I would like to share a couple of thoughts or comments on my side. I prefer than talking rather than typing. So practically what I see in the diversity scene is pretty much that a lot of time people are thinking in clusters, like diversity in connection to gender or sexual orientation or nationality or color. That's nice and fine, but I'm not so happy with that approach, because in my opinion, diversity doesn't have to be necessarily labeled that it's whatever the color of the skin or whatever. It's just the fact that they are different people with different approaches, and that I know that it's like hard to define in this way, but practically when I meet someone, I need to know that I need to be aware of that other person might have totally different background or roots where the opinions of him, her is coming from. That's in a nutshell.
I think, yeah, one thing on that, I think that we can all be mindful of, when we're approaching these kinds of spaces or engaging with these kinds of labels that are popping up, is to, and if you're trying to escape the labels, I think it might be difficult because, how much identity is involved in these people. For some, it's really connected. For others, it's not. What I find is a helpful exercise for me in approaching any of this is kind of doing a check-in on the reactive judgments that go on in my mind instantaneously. And am I allowing those to affect how I engage with somebody, or how I converse with somebody, or, what kind of system I'm building, or whatever that may be. So that might be something that we can keep in mind, as we think about navigating the different kinds of language that's popping up in the culture, popping up, kind of bubbling to the surface and becoming, immediately, visible for some of us maybe that hadn't really noticed it before. And I think that's important to acknowledge as well. Thanks for sharing that.
Yes, I think it's a really interesting thought, and one that we chew on a lot here. And I think it's a matter of when we use labels, especially, it's striking this balance of making sure those labels don't impede our judgment, but also acknowledging that people's lived experiences are different. So it's a way to not ignore someone's differences, but acknowledge, celebrate, bring into the fold, and that's that balance. But I think you also touched on that about acknowledging people's different life experiences. Yeah. So,
and Ken, to answer your question or your comment in the chat, I think that it's that there are some that are trying, and there are some that are very new to this stuff, and it's a learning process. It's everybody and every company and organization is starting at a different place in their DEI journey. I can imagine that a lot of us as AIESECers are kind of have this thought that we're really aware of all of these things. And I find myself even, having a pretty, international experience, that there's still, judgments and biases that I recognize that I have. I can get on my high horse and say that I'm very mission driven and purpose driven and want to support people, but there's things that I even catch myself with, and it is a learning process and it is a practice that I think everybody can do. And so, I think supporting anybody who's trying to make an effort is a really productive way to do that, because it certainly can get frustrating when we think, why isn't it just better? But, there's a lot of deep-seated issues, sometimes trauma, sometimes, whatever it may be that kind of bleed into our everyday actions and prevent us from maybe acting or showing up in the way that we would ideally like to.
Thu-Hong, if I might make a comment. This is Bruce.
Sure.
Yes.
I'm first of all just really intrigued and excited about what y'all are doing. But the comment I want to make is I went to work for IBM right after my AIESEC experience, and I remember amongst their three key, I'm trying to think of the word for it, guiding principles or core values, was respect for the individual. That was in 1976, respect for the individual. And I think what George might have been speaking of is we need to look at categories and labels or individual populations because we have to try to bring more balance to an imbalanced environment. But we're really talking about just every single individual. We're all different. And so I think the ultimate utopia would be we have mutual respect for every single individual. And we care enough to get to really know them. So to me, there were good initiatives even in 76, but the platform for speaking the message and influencing people was nothing like it is today. And of course, that platform can be used for evil as well. But we've got this global platform way to communicate now, which is so exciting to get the good message out. So congratulations or compliments, commendations to you all.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you. Yeah, it's incredible how some of these messages, they just carry so well over time. And I think you're absolutely right. Something that Natalie will go into more detail about is sort of what it means to break down and actually start to plan and move your organization, because like you mentioned, the perfect utopia is meeting every individual's needs. And that's kind of that push and pull with diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, that the goal is to meet everyone's needs, but that takes resources, that takes time. It is not cheap to do DEI initiatives, but what we want to show you is that it is easy, and it is simpler than we may think. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. For your comments here, and we'll just move forward with the next. I'll pass it on.
Yeah, and for those of you, those last couple of comments, I think we'll kind of touch on that a little bit in our next couple parts. So if we don't answer your question, ask it again. But I think we'll kind of go into it a little bit. So we talked about some of the mistakes, some of the pitfalls, kind of, what can go wrong, but how can we proactively, make things right instead of totally being on the defensive or the reactive side of things all the time. So here are a few things that we've kind of put together for you that we think are going to be helpful for you to consider, when we're actually trying to think about how to integrate DEI into an organization. How can we do that? What does it take to kind of create a plan for this? So the first thing that we'll talk about is vision and goals, which is kind of goes back to this utopia, but it's really kind of, why are we doing this? What do you envision for the future of your organization? This is so important to ground ourselves in, because this goes, I think, a little bit to Julienne's comment of, how do we, a lot of organizations are saying that they're diverse or inclusive or equitable, but are they really? I don't know. And a lot of them are like Thu-Hong mentioned as one of the pitfalls, is rushing into it before they've really had a space to actually envision, why am I doing this? What do I want to do this for? Where do I want to get to? What's the future of my organization, and how DEI is actually incorporated into that? So, and it really helps then to try to break down, like any other strategy, really, your vision into some goals. What are some focus areas that you can kind of break it down into, so that you can actually be able to track a little bit of your progress and track a little bit of your success toward it. Like Thu-Hong's comment before, it's helpful to be as specific as you can, not just say, I want to be more diverse. It's that I want to be more representative of my city's BIPOC, population, or, I want to have, all of my processes reviewed under an inclusive lens throughout the year, or, something like this, or, I want to have, more diversity and representation in our leadership team specifically, or in our pipeline, or things like this that can be really specific for you. And then thinking about how will you track this? Thinking about it ahead of time is going to set you up for success. Certainly, instead of thinking about it at the end of it. So consider this at the beginning, and not just how will you track it, but, what kind of accountability is there? How are you going to check your progress? How are you going to review that you're on track toward this vision that you're looking for? We want to make sure too that, when we're setting goals, be a little wary of things like quotas or very superficial quantitative goals that can be very enticing to try to have a number and be very quantitative about it. But just be very careful about, misusing numbers in your pursuit of goal achievement or goal setting, or trying to get too structured around it. So that's kind of the first thing to start with. So then we can move into understanding. Once we kind of understand, where do we want to go? We got to understand the gap. So what's going on here? And this is where it's really important to take a comprehensive look at everything. So think about all of the business functions in your organization, whether it's a nonprofit or it's a company, whether it's private or public, whether it's small or large. All of the businesses, all of the organizations are going to have some form of these functions. So we've broken it down, and there's like around 20 that we've kind of mapped out here that are in the context of this DEI umbrella that makes sense. So this is a list that you can use to start examining this. And of course, this is a different conversation depending maybe on your level of authority, your role in the organization. If you're a CEO or an owner versus an executive versus a middle manager versus an individual contributor, but it doesn't really matter which level you're at. There is a way to look at this. So, if you're on a more senior or strategic level, you can take this kind of broad view approach and look at everything and take a really deep examination of all of your operations across the business, all of your policies. And if you're an individual contributor, focus on what's within your purview and see what you can do to affect the processes you interact with on a daily basis. So then we go to number 3, which is looking at who's going to do this, your personnel, right? So what's important to think about when we're looking at and talking about who's going to do this work. One is to avoid the pitfall that Thu-Hong mentioned earlier of potentially tokenizing people who are exhausted by trying to advocate for this work, or it's personally affecting them too deeply. So, it's helpful to take kind of an objective look at what skills and experience are actually required to do the kinds of projects that I have in mind, the kinds of goals that I've got, the vision that I'm looking for. Who's it going to take actually to accomplish this? It could be a consultant. It could be somebody you hire internally. This is, there's a big variety of things you could do. You could have them help with individual projects. You could have them help with a big giant engagement. There's a lot of different ways that you can think about it, but considering, what kind of skills are required and also how many people are required. What we see really often is that companies view this work as supplementary to their job roles, or volunteer work, or bonus work. And the reality is that it really should not be, because it's such a critical function of the business that's really, permeates through every function of the business. So, this is important to consider, is especially when you're budgeting and you're planning, is how many resources do I actually need to do this? What is our current capacity for this? What knowledge are we missing internally that we may need to outsource externally? And also your pace, that can affect it as well. And if you want to learn more, by the way, about the personnel stuff, we wrote a whole blog about it. So, I've given you just the highlight here, but if you're trying to figure out how and who to involve, you can take a look at that blog. It'll tell you about how to go about hiring a DEI practitioner, whether that's internally or externally, or all of that business, things to consider, questions to ask yourself. So then, now I've got this understanding of where I'm going, what I'm trying to accomplish, where I'm at today, and what kind of people, what kind of talent I need. Then I want to talk about what is the actual scope of influence that's required to do this. Often we see in companies that there's a lot of grassroots initiatives. There are, like employee-driven things. I talked about how volunteers wouldn't be enough, but especially if they aren't compensated. And the other key factor that really holds people back, or holds this stuff back from being able to make a change, is that these groups that are, tasked with this responsibility aren't actually given the level of authority required. It's like, I want you to fix my whole business, but I'm not going to give you any decision-making power, and you have to approve everything, So making sure that the level of responsibility that you're tasking people with is, aligned with the actual decision-making authority that's required. Because this is a topic that permeates across all functions of the business, it's going to take a more senior level, strategic level type of decision-making often. There are different stages, in how an organization can go. So it can certainly start grassroots, but if we're looking at sustained change and lasting impact, then really figuring out who's it gonna take to integrate this stuff into the business, not just to do, like John mentioned before, these one-off things here and there. Because anybody probably, can coordinate an event or a training, or find a speaker, or change one policy. But if we're looking at transformational organization-wide change, we need to get serious about it. So that's scope of influence. And then looking at your budget. So this echoes some of the things that I've said before, but there are so many DEI leaders out there and program managers out there that are doing this work without being compensated, which is just silly, because there's so much learning and expertise required for this stuff. I mean, if you think about all of those functions, like a DEI practitioner has to wear a lot of hats and has to really have a good understanding of operations across the business to truly be able to enact change. They've got to wear their HR hat, they've got to wear their culture hat, they've got to wear their product development hat, they've got to wear their sales hat, they've got to wear all these kinds of hats to understand how truly deeply integrated these systemic potential issues are, permeating throughout the business. So consider this, consider a budget, make sure there is a budget for this stuff. Even if you're not at a place where you can compensate people yet, make sure you're planning for it in the future, and you're planning for the resources that are going to actually be required to bring on the expertise that's required to make these changes. And then we've got the last one, which none of these things that I've talked about matter if there's not buy-in and ownership from the leadership of an organization. Just without a doubt, I can say it, very confidently that without this, it's going to be really difficult for any DEI initiatives to truly come to full fruition or truly make transformational change across the organization. Without leadership, you can get a little bit maybe, but you need leadership to make it all the way, is really at the end of the day. And what's important at this level, especially for any of my leaders in the room, is thinking about the accountability structures that you put in place for yourself and for these kinds of strategies and plans, because there's a lot of empty promises out there that we can see today, a lot of public statements, a lot of things that really are surface level or actually not acted upon. There's actually no accountability. And we do also have some more information about this too in another blog that we just wrote. But if we look at how many organizations a year ago, all of this got stirred up a year ago, and a lot of things were said that when you look today, not a lot was done compared to what was said. So this is a really important piece to keep in mind, that this is the keystone ingredient, I think, to making true organizational change with DEI. So I'm going to pause here. I kind of just spewed all that at you. What questions do you have about this, or comments, or anything at this point?
Can I make a comment?
Sure can.
It needs enforcement. It needs sanctions. And I say that based on many experiences. When I moved to Rhode Island, it was the most corrupt state in the country. I served on a constitutional convention on the Ethics Commission, and we created an independent, powerful ethics commission at the state level that could remove people from office. The politicians fought it for 10 years. Rhode Island is now in place, and it is now ranked as one of the most honest states in the country. Sanctions work. The military realizes the same thing. They have just moved, as you know, from having supervisors judge harassment. Seriously, does that work? To having independent prosecutors. Same thing for the Red Cross globally. It takes sanctions to make things work. Sorry to be harsh, but without sanctions,
no, you're right. You're right. And that's and that's exactly what we mean by accountability structures. So it's deciding those from the get-go. And this is true of any kind of strategy, working relationship, anything, that setting these kinds of structures in place from day one at the planning stage is going to make it a lot easier, in the future when it actually, comes to light that, something happens, or it just helps you be more mindful of it throughout the process as well. But having accountability structures that are in place that are not only you checking your own progress, but that allow others to keep you accountable as well, are going to be really crucial. So, in an organization, that's the senior leadership and it's the employees, or it's the market, it's your customers and consumers, and being open to that and actively taking a participative role in setting those, it goes a long way, I think. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Ken.
I think what you're doing is fabulous. I just hope you do it for the Business Roundtable next.
Yeah, we're making our way.
I just wanted to interrupt quickly. We're coming on the hour. I know Thu-Hong and Natalie, I believe, have agreed they could stick around for a few more minutes. But I did just want to say, because I know a lot of you are working and might have to go back to your tasks, So first of all, before you leave us, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Natalie and Thu-Hong. I'm sure they have some things to wrap up with, but thank you to everybody else who has been here. It's been a fantastic conversation, such an important one. And please stick around if you can, but if you have to leave, totally get it. And we will be sending you a copy of the slides and a recording, link to the recording. So thank you so much for being here. Big hand to Natalie and Thu-Hong, and please stay if you can.
Yes, thank you, everybody. There's one final thing that I kind of want to end with before I open it up for some open questions and stuff. Is this conversation here about businesses and nonprofits, because there is what I really want to say about this. You know, given the fact that we're all AIESECers and we all probably have a good soft spot for nonprofits, but probably a lot of us have found ourselves in business. You know, that there's this thought that nonprofits are always good, or you know that, and they can have operational efficiency and they can have a strategic outlook. And there's this concept that businesses can opt out of anything good, that it's okay for them to not do good, you know, but businesses can be good. So I just wanted to keep that in mind, you know, and you know, think about what does this mean for DEI really, you know, that not here to advocate for one organizational structure over another, because both have history of being very exclusionary and very marginalizing. It doesn't matter how good or bad you are, right? And maybe even exploiting different groups, but there's benefits and shortcomings in both for-profit and nonprofit in this DEI space. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, that, you know, all of us have groups that we're responsible for, and all of us are interfacing with people in some way or another. And so with that comes the need for this conversation about DEI. So, you know, and then of course, you know, we think about this, and, you know, once an AIESECer, always an AIESECer. And so I want to just pose this up here for you guys today to think about this, and think about, you know, no matter which organization or what role we're in today, is how are we, you know, living this AIESEC mission that we all care so much about, and considering, you know, what does it mean to fulfill humankind's potential? What kind of impact can we have from our seats? You know, and for my AIESEC students that are on the call here too, you know, there's often this notion of that, you know, when we leave AIESEC, we have to either go work for a good nonprofit or sell our souls to business, the corporate world. And that's just not the case. There are businesses that can do good, and there is a lot of need for more business structure in nonprofits, as I'm sure Ken could attest to. You know, and I wanted to just share that Thu-Hong and I, when we were thinking about our mission for our company, and it was largely grounded in our experience in AIESEC and in our belief in the AIESEC mission. And this is really one big way that we are trying to continue as alumni to really pursue peace and fulfillment of humankind's potential. So I hope this is something that you'll consider, you know, as you move in the world, that no matter where you are, no matter who you are, that we can all still consider and remember this AIESEC mission, and because it really does at the end of the day boil down to this sort of utopia that Bruce was alluding to earlier. So that's all we got for today. I would love to talk with you guys. Tell me what stood out to you, what surprised you, what questions you have. Free for all, open conversation, come off your mics. We'll hang around for a bit to chat.
Yes. I want to address, I think, Bruce, you typed in this question about the types of pushback companies are experiencing. So yeah, just to address that, and everyone hold in your mind if you have other questions too. There's a multitude of things that we've seen. I think a big barrier, a common pushback is defensiveness. I mean, that, you know, people don't want to admit that they have to improve in the first place. Another one is just this idea that it's futile to even start. It can be, DEI work is all encompassing. It can feel very heavy, and it can feel very hard, and it's hard to have hope through that. So that's another kind of thing that we see too, is that why why bother even trying? Yeah. And then the last thing is really just kind of just a general fear of uncertainty. There's a lot of potential to make mistakes in the DEI space, and we talked through some of them here. And so that, people are motivated to take action, but when they don't know what the end outcome could be, they don't know how to start, they don't know what's going to happen when they start, that can be another reason for let's not start at all, or let's just do the bare minimum that's sort of touching the water, but not even jumping in or really getting change. So yeah, in general, that's kind of what we see. And those are hard challenges to overcome. So to that, we would say, take it one step at a time and do what you can, because it does make a difference, even on a small scale.
Thu-Hong, do you think coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that it's rocking the business world, or people are saying, I quit? I've learned this other way of working, or is it also because I don't have to work for a company who doesn't support me as an individual? Like the younger generation, Gen Z and others, are able to speak out and say, they don't treat their employees the way that I want to be treated, and I can make a decision not to work there. And if that continues to be sort of a driving force among their decisions for employment, it really is an employee's market at the moment. It seems to me that from what I'm reading and listening to, that employers are having a hard time retaining, finding talent, recruiting talent. And one of the reasons is about what you're speaking about. And that is, if you don't respect me and what I stand for, and as an individual, and you don't think it's important, then I have lots of other places that I can consider. And that might also help drive some of the change.
Yes, yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that, Maggie, because I do think there's a lot of leverage that potential candidates, if you're applying to a job, that you can ask in that interviewing screening process to hold your future future employer a little bit more accountable to what they say on their website versus what they do. So you can ask about, what are the DEI initiatives in the company? How is DEI work rewarded? Is there potential for me to do that in my role? Is it already integrated in my role? And not just, candidates, but also I think current employees have that leverage too. Like you said, Maggie, just the retention, the turnover, current employees, those are also questions you can ask your manager, your department, your boss. Of course, knowing that I know that it's uncomfortable, especially if you have a lot to lose to push for things. And so just being mindful of that, but yes, when you do feel comfortable, when you do feel safe to ask those questions, I certainly think that it's in your favor, especially right now in this time.
Yeah, and it's certainly a growing need. I mean, certainly it's becoming a more prevalent request from younger generations, or demand, that it's going to have to affect, it will ultimately affect how businesses are and operate. And we're seeing that in all kinds of ways. Some of it is about stand on justice and issues, and some of it is about work from home, and the accessibility of working from home and accommodations and things like that, so there's a wide variety of how organizations are shifting now. And certainly the younger generation is very poised to help really drive that as they select their workplaces, for sure.
And I think the bottom line, and you've mentioned it, I mentioned at the top of the discussion, you're more profitable. You are a more profitable business. And to Ken's point, that ultimately in this country, at the end of the day, we're a capitalist society, and the companies are going to make decisions based on their bottom line. Unfortunately, that happens more than not, right? So if that eventually they come around to the fact that this is going to make more money for them and their shareholders by having a better DEI program and walking the talk, that might also be a big shift.
Yes, absolutely. And those outcomes are also compounding. If you add all of those positive business outcomes we showed, the aggregation of all of those is even better and more sustainable growth for any organization. Especially, one example, very obvious one, is that there's no retention and turnover. It's very expensive to hire, train, and onboard new employees. So if that's not happening, then yes, you're definitely going to be more profitable. your employer branding. If it's easier and faster to recruit because people are knocking on your door to work for your business, it's another thing. And if people love to be a part of your business and work in it, they're going to talk about it and advocate for it, which probably is good for sales and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, a lot of positives that can come out of it. Absolutely. Yeah. What other thoughts? Who else would like to?
Some good comments in here too.
Hi everyone, this is Lana. I'm actually tuning in from Canada, but I was a trainee in the US, so I'm part of AIESEC Life still, which is great. I get to attend webinars like this. So a couple of things you said really resonated with me, and one was about types of working. So I work for a company that really emphasizes diversity and inclusion, which is great. However, I feel like it still is a very narrow definition of what diversity and inclusion stands for. And being an expat and being, living in North America, I'm originally from Croatia, and AIESEC is actually what brought me to both the US and Canada. I feel like I am oftentimes being kind of alone in, being the one person who doesn't have family, for example, here in this country. And when we're talking about remote work, every company is now saying, oh, everyone, is able to work remotely from anywhere in the country. And they feel very generous when they make those statements. And I don't think that involves the whole workforce, because there are a lot of people like myself who have families abroad and who want to go and see their families, and like you can only go for, I don't know, like a couple of weeks that you have the vacation, and trying to shift that sort of thinking of like, if you want to have a truly diverse workforce, it's not just about checking off a box, like whether someone identifies as a visible minority, and if they do, then great, you have a diverse workforce. And if they don't, but they're still an immigrant, let's say, then they just fit into this big pool of like, we're all the same and we should all have the same working styles, and we're already being so generous. So like, don't be too greedy, I guess. So I guess the bottom line is maybe a question for you, how would you frame that expansion of what diversity and inclusion really stands for? And I think we had some really great conversation about it today, and take it to the company, to the decision makers, and say, if you truly want a diverse and inclusive workforce and a culture that promotes it, you have to think broader.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Lana. That's great. And that it speaks a lot to what I'm hearing you say, is that it's actually maybe not even diversity that's really the problem area. It's the inclusion piece that says, like, I want to have a diverse workforce, but they have not fully considered the inclusive piece of it. That's truly making sure that they're accounting for every person in their workforce. So there's some weight, some responsibility that comes with, like, trying to get a diverse workforce or having a diverse workforce. And if this is a goal of the organization, it's kind of like that first pitfall that we explained is, be wary of jumping too deeply or too quickly into hiring a diverse workforce if you don't have inclusive systems. So, something that maybe is a helpful place to start is to examine some of the policies, specifically around this example, of working from home, and share those ideas, or find if there's other folks, that do this or have these kinds of needs, or maybe have other needs of work from home. Surveys are a great way, to poll for information, is encouraging your workplace to do an anonymous company-wide survey that, even if it's just about this topic, that can help spark some things. And I think what's important to consider in those surveys is that we're not looking for majority answers. We're looking for all the answers. We're looking at every single answer. And that's the important piece of it is this policy serving everybody in our workforce? Is this actually considering everybody in our workforce? maybe we can't have it all, and maybe there are some, places where it doesn't make practical sense to do it, but that needs to be a conversation and an agreement and an understanding and an expectation, and it's communicated clearly to everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And I keep the questions coming. I'm just going to move to the last slide so that you all know how to contact us. We're still here for the next 15 minutes, but just so if people do have to hop off sporadically, please do stay in touch.
Yeah, and so Cassie and Veronica, thank you for your question. There's certainly two ways to approach DEI, and one is like really starting from and driven by leadership, and the other is this kind of grassroots employee driven kind of thing. So there's the kind of the first step in all of this is creating spaces to build awareness about DEI and about how these issues affect the workplace and about how these issues affect the workforce. So starting even small forums, it can be communicating to executives. We've seen some companies where there were a couple of employees that felt very strongly about this and which, emailed the CEO and said, hey, listen, we want to do this. We need to start changing something about it. And they began a DEI committee that way. Some folks, it's a slower path and they're working their way up to get executive sponsors. That can be a really helpful way to get some more pull faster, in the organization, is to find executives who are also passionate about this kind of work and see the value of it right away, that can, help guide some spaces or help provide a couple of resources resources like dollars or time or people, not like, like articles or something. But so that might be one way that you can start. Thu-Hong, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this too.
Yes, it takes, I would say on top of that, building awareness, it's really about identifying others and power in groups. If you really feel like there isn't a sort of channel to reach a leadership level, someone who maybe even a direct manager that you can speak to about it and that they can advocate for you, or other DEI initiatives, then it's really about trying to identify others in the organization who feel the same way to collect those thoughts. If the company's not doing a survey, doing your own survey and bringing those numbers, I think can really help, show that success, gain momentum, and really demonstrating that this is something worthwhile to invest in. I've certainly been in that position where it's just not going to happen, unfortunately, that every leader is going to care, for lack of better words, going to care about DEI. They have so many priorities and so many things to work on. So as much as you can, showing success, showing other employee buy-in, putting on an event yourself, showing things like participation, satisfaction metrics, collecting these stories of how it impacts work. Those things can help you get leverage to bubble things up and build that relationship to eventually have a seat at the table.
And it could also be within your own team. Maybe there's not a lot you don't want to go so big yet, but you could talk to your direct supervisor or your direct manager leading your team meetings and say, hey, can we try this, or can we start integrating this, or I've got this thought, or things like that. You can also use those spaces for. That's great. George, to your question, I think showing statistics is really great. I think there's a lot about education and learning and understanding. So I think activities to build that in a really honest and truthful way, I think are really productive. So I think showing statistics about the current state. We really love looking at reports and data and things like that. So having some of those primary resources or primary sources of data collection to share and then discuss about is I think a cool thing to do. Considering who is in the group, you can bring different things to light, or maybe you have a discussion about what kinds of topics you'd like to learn about, and you can have a check-in space or something like this to discuss these kinds of things further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, George, that's a great point, because I think meetings, yeah, it totally depends on who, like how open or comfortable you feel in the group, because I think there some, I can imagine, at least just my experience, some teams, like I think the manager would have wanted me to, yeah, bring facts and statistics and kind of point it and relate it to the function of the team. If you feel comfortable, if it's like a team or a group of people that you have some rapport with, I think really building those personal connections is going to be really key here. I've seen DEI initiatives really take flight when it becomes less about sort of these abstract ways we can help people, and when employees themselves speak up and say like, hey, I've felt marginalized. Somebody told me, I came, just an example off the top of my head, someone came back from maternity leave, and the first thing someone said to her was, how was your vacation? I can't believe you would leave. It's going to impact your career. And she shared that in a team meeting, and that really shook my team and said, it's not just an abstract thing that we should change something. This is real. Like we can point to why this is problematic. So yeah, to the extent that you feel comfortable and that you think it will be received well, I think definitely start to put a face behind those data points.
So I just want to be mindful again of the time. Thu-Hong is calling in from Germany, so she's 10 hours ahead of us. So it's getting very late for her. And it's like a perfect AIESEC event. There's always the diehards to the very end. If it wasn't a Thursday at 12:30, I'd have a glass of wine or a beer, but I can't do that right now. But again, I want to just huge thanks to everybody for being here. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thu-Hong, Natalie, you are awesome. I love working with you. So thank you for bringing your experience and your wisdom and your grace to this group. Again, thank you so much for being here. And everybody, we'll provide this information to you. Take a screenshot if you want to see how to get a hold of them. Again, thank you so much for being here, and have a great rest of your day, evening, wherever you may be.
Yes, thank you so much, Maggie, and thank you all. It was such a pleasure to talk with you all today. Thanks for showing up, and thanks for letting us present to you.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, and please contact us if you have other questions. We're happy to talk more about it.
Thanks for sharing.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.